He had one rule. Never look at their faces. Not the bodies on the road. Not the mothers being pushed out of villages with whatever they could carry in their arms. Not the children watching from doorways as his unit marched past, their eyes following the column like they were memorizing something they would need later. If you looked, you started to think. And on the Eastern Front in the winter of 1944, thinking was the most dangerous thing a German soldier could do. Ernst Mauer had kept that rule for 11 months. He broke it on a Tuesday in February. And it cost him everything. Or saved him. Depending on who's telling the story. Ernst was 23 years old and came from a small town outside of Heidelberg where the streets smelled like bread every morning and the winters were cold but not cruel. His father ran a bakery. His mother grew tomatoes in the back garden and talked to them when she thought no one was listening. Before the war, Ernst had wanted to study architecture. He used to draw buildings in the margins of his school notebooks, bridges, impossible staircases, towers that leaned slightly to the left as if listening to something. His mother had framed one of them and hung it above the kitchen table. He had been on the Eastern Front since March 1943. He had survived the heat of summer, the mud of autumn, and now this winter a cold so vast and so deliberate it didn't feel like weather. It felt like the land itself was trying to drive them back. The sky sat low and gray over everything. The trees stood like white bones against it. The roads were iron beneath the snow, and every step rang out like a small announcement, "We are here, we are here, we do not belong here." He was not a cruel man. That is the first thing you need to understand about Ernst Mauer. He was not brave, either. Not in any way that would have earned a commendation. He was careful. He was quiet. He kept his head down and his eyes on the road, and he did what he was told without asking too much about why. That was how you survived. That was the contract the war offered, and he had signed it, like everyone else, without reading the full terms. The order came at 4 in the morning. A cluster of farmhouses 3 kilometers northwest. Suspected partisan activity. The unit would sweep through before dawn, clear each building, report back. Standard. They had done it enough times that no one asked questions anymore. The landscape as they moved was completely still. No wind. No birds. Just the crunch of boots on frozen ground and the pale blue darkness before dawn, and above them a sky so clear and so full of stars it seemed wrong, too beautiful for what was happening beneath it. The farmhouses appeared out of the dark one by one, low and silent. Walls the color of ash. Roofs caved in on one side. The kind of buildings that had already given up. Feldwebel Kuhn led them in. He was a broad man with a voice like gravel and eyes that had long since stopped seeing things as people. He moved through spaces quickly, decisively, and he expected the same from his man. Ernst went in last. He always went in last. He told himself it was efficiency. The last man in confirms what the others have cleared. But the truth was simpler. He was afraid of what he might find waiting at the back. The farmhouse was small. A main room stripped of everything useful. A side room that had once housed animals still smelling faintly of it, which was the warmest smell in that entire frozen country. And at the back, a broken door hanging on a single hinge, half open, leading into a room full of darkness. Kuhn gestured toward it from across the main room. his eyes on Ernst. "You." Ernst pushed the door open with the barrel of his rifle. He raised his lamp. The boy was in the corner. Behind the rusted shell of a stone stove, wedged between it and the wall, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped around them. 8 years old. Maybe 9. Dark hair matted with dirt. A coat so enormous it swallowed him. Adult coat, man's coat, the sleeves pooling around his hands. His boots had no laces. His face was white with cold. His eyes were open. Wide open. Completely still. Fixed on Ernst with an expression that was not quite fear anymore, it was past fear. It was the face of someone who had already traveled through every version of what came next and arrived somewhere beyond all of them. He didn't run. Didn't flinch. Didn't make a sound. He just looked at Ernst the way that small animals look at what is about to kill them. Not pleading. Not surrendering. Simply, "I see you. I am here. Do what you're going to do." Ernst stood in the doorway. From outside, he could hear Kuhn's boots crossing the main room. Slow, deliberate. Coming toward the back. The boy's eyes moved at the sound. Then back to Ernst. Ernst looked at his face. That was the rule he broke. He looked at the boy's face and something happened in his chest. Not a thought, not a decision, something faster and deeper than either of those things, something that moved before he could stop it. He saw the coat that wasn't his. He saw the boots without laces. He saw the 8 sentences this child's life had been reduced to: alone, cold, hiding, waiting, in a room in a country that was eating itself alive. Kuhn's footsteps stopped just outside the door. Mauer. Was ist hinten? What's back there? Ernst turned off the lamp. 1 second of complete darkness. Complete silence. He heard the boy stop breathing. He pulled the broken door shut behind him, stepped back into the main room, and looked at Kuhn in the dim light filtering through the cracked wall. "Empty," he said. "Just a back room. Nothing." Kuhn looked at him for a moment. His eyes were the color of old tin and they didn't move quickly. Ernst held his gaze and kept his face completely still and thought about nothing. If you thought about something, it showed. Then Kuhn looked away. "Move out." Ernst moved out. He walked into the frozen dark and didn't look back at the farmhouse. He watched the tree line. He watched the road. He followed the rule from that point on, for the rest of the night, eyes on the horizon, never on the faces. But the boy's face was already inside him. It was too late for the rule. They camped 2 kilometers east in the ruins of a stone schoolhouse. The walls still standing on 3 sides. Someone had written a multiplication table on the blackboard that no one had erased. 6 times 7. 6 times 8. 6 times 9. Most of the men were asleep within an hour. Ernst lay on his back on the hard floor and stared up through the broken roof at the sky. The stars were still out. The same impossible, indifferent stars that had been there during the sweep. He listened to the wind beginning to move across the fields and thought about the boy's eyes and the coat that wasn't his and what it meant that the coat wasn't his. He reached into his breast pocket and took out the letter. He had been carrying it since November. It was from his sister Lena, who was 12 and who wrote letters the way other people kept diaries, everything included, nothing too small to mention. In this one she had written about the neighbor's cat, which had learned to open the back gate. She had written about a dream involving a frozen lake and a white horse standing in the middle of it. She had written about how the bakery didn't smell the same anymore because Papa couldn't get the right flour, and how she missed the old smell, the way it used to rise through the floorboards of her room on Sunday mornings and wake her up before the alarm. At the bottom, she had drawn a picture in pencil. A house with a lopsided chimney. A dog with enormous ears. A sun with 8 uneven rays, each one a different length, like they had grown at different speeds. Ernst read it 3 times. Then he folded it and put it back against his chest. He thought about the boy's coat. Too large. A man's coat. A coat someone had put on him before they went away, because it was the warmest thing there was, and because maybe they thought if he was warm enough it would be enough. He lay there until the cold made sleeping the only option left. The weeks that followed were the worst of the winter. The Soviet counteroffensive had begun to push in from the east, and the unit spent most of February falling back in controlled stages, which is the military way of saying retreating without calling it that. The landscape they moved through had been fought over twice and showed it. Villages that were only chimneys. Fields that were only craters. Roads lined with things Ernst followed the rule about. He did not speak about the farmhouse. Not to Kuhn, not to the other men, not in the letters he sent home, which said only that he was well, the weather was difficult, he hoped everyone was eating enough, but he thought about it. At night, mostly. The lamp going out. The door pulled shut. The silence on the other side of it. He didn't know if what he'd done was courage or weakness or simply a moment of human failure that the war would eventually correct. He didn't know if the boy had been found the next day, by another unit, by Kuhn himself on a second sweep. He didn't know if the coat had been warm enough. He carried that not knowing the way he carried Lena's letter. Quietly. In the breast pocket. Close to where it hurt. On the 28th of February, near a bend in the Dnieper River where the ice had begun to crack, a Soviet mortar crew found Ernst Mauer's unit in open ground. The first shell landed wide. The second did not. Ernst was 23 years and 4 months old. The medic who reached him said it was fast. That is the kindness medics offer, and whether it is true or not, it is the kindness that matters. The sky above the river was the color of pewter. The ice groaned beneath the snow. Somewhere to the east, the guns kept going, indifferent and enormous, as they always did, as they always would. His personal effects arrived in Heidelberg 6 weeks later in a brown envelope. His mother opened it at the kitchen table beneath the framed drawing of the Leaning Tower. Lena sat beside her, not yet knowing how to help with something like this, so she simply stayed close. Inside the envelope, identification papers, a watch with a cracked face, a folded photograph of the family taken in 1938 in front of the bakery. And 2 letters. The first one Lena recognized immediately, her own handwriting, the pencil drawing at the bottom, the 8-rayed sun. The second they didn't recognize at all. It was tucked behind Lena's letter. Folded very small, crumpled at the edges, written on a piece of torn wallpaper, the kind with faded blue flowers, the kind that covers the walls of old farmhouses, in a hand so unsteady it was barely legible. Not German. Not French. Something else. They assumed it was a document Ernst had collected. Evidence of something. They didn't throw it away because it had been in his pocket, and because of that it was his, and because of that it was sacred. It went into the envelope. The envelope went into a box. The box went into a drawer in the back bedroom. For 43 years. In 1987, Lena was 55 years old and living in Freiburg in a house with her husband and a gray cat that slept on the radiator. Her mother had died that spring. Lena had gone back to the house in Heidelberg to go through things, the way you do slowly, carefully, with the feeling that every object is a question you have to answer. At the bottom of the wardrobe in the back bedroom, inside a wooden box she remembered from childhood, she found a brown envelope. She sat on the floor of her mother's bedroom and went through it slowly. The photograph. The watch, her own letter, 43 years old, the pencil sun still there at the bottom, faint now, the 8 rays even smaller than she remembered drawing them. Then the wallpaper note. She brought it to a colleague at the university where her husband taught, a historian who had spent his career in Eastern European archives. She handed it to him without context. He read it once. Then he sat back in his chair and read it again. Then he set it carefully on the desk between them, as if it were fragile, and looked at her. "Where did your brother find this?" She said she didn't know. He told her what it said. 8 sentences. The handwriting uneven, the letters large and effortful, the way children write when they are writing quickly and in the dark. "A German soldier came to the house tonight. He saw me behind the stove. He looked at me for a long time. I was very afraid. But he turned off the light and he did not tell them. I don't know his name. My mother always said God sends someone when you have nobody left. I want him to know I am still here. I want him to know." Lena sat with that for a long time. She thought about her brother at 23. She thought about the cold he had written around without ever describing. She thought about him lying on his back somewhere in the ruins of a country, reading her letter about a cat and a horse in a dream and a sun she had drawn with 8 uneven rays. She thought about a child writing 8 sentences on a piece of wallpaper in the dark and somehow slipping them into the coat of a soldier whose name he didn't know. Ernst had never known. He carried the note for 3 weeks without knowing it was there. Without knowing a boy had followed him into the dark, or waited until the unit slept, or pressed a folded piece of flowered wallpaper into the pocket of the coat of a man who had looked at his face and then turned off the lamp. He died not knowing. He died thinking it might have meant nothing. That the boy might have been found. That the moment in the dark room had been only a pause before the same ending. He never knew it had been enough. He never knew that in a village in western Ukraine, a child had decided cold, alone, in a house that was not his house, wearing a coat that was not his coat, that a stranger deserved to know he had done something right. Ernst Mauer had one rule. He broke it once. He looked at a boy's face, and turned off the lamp, and said nothing. That was all. And 43 years later, a woman sat on the floor of her dead mother's bedroom and read 8 sentences written by a child who had never stopped wanting him to know. I am still here. I want him to know. Ernst Mauer. Heidelberg, 1920. Dnieper River, February 1944. Age 23. The boy's name was never recorded. The letter is still in the family.